guys, it's Mira at Brew What Makes You Happy. Today I'm actually filming a book video, which I can't remember the last time I did one of those. I thought it would be a good idea to film what I've read so far this year for the 6 months that we've had from January to June. If I'm being completely honest, I'm amazed that I've actually been able to read any books. If you've watched any of my videos, probably only the last two because I'm just not very consistent. But I was actually pregnant and gave birth in February, so I really thought that I wasn't going to be able to read pretty much anything. So considering I'm here to sit and film a video tells you that I've read enough books. Reading is reading. It doesn't matter if you read one book, 50, 100, whatever. As long as you get time to read and enjoy it while you do it, who cares? I actually managed to read some physical books. However, this is kind of false advertisement because I only actually read these 3 physical... Oh my god, did I just get lipstick on that? Fuming. I only actually got to read these 3 physical books in their entirety. I did start reading Clockwork Angel and Clockwork Prince. I'll put this down. Books are heavy. I did actually start reading the 2 first books in the Infernal Devices as the physical copies. I then also purchased them on the Kindle. It just got difficult as Matilda got older to be able to actually sit and read a physical book. The only time that I'd actually get to read, and the only time I really get to read now, are usually between the hours of 12 AM and 1 AM. When everyone is asleep, I'll use the Kindle so that I don't have to keep lights on and keep anybody awake. Everything else that I read so far is on the Kindle. So in total, I've read 10 books so far this year. Probably doesn't seem like a fat lot, but I'm very proud of myself, and my goal for the year is 20, so I'm on track. Fingers crossed I'll actually hit 20 books this year, not putting too much pressure on myself. The first book that I read this year was The Final Empire by Brando Sando. This was actually a reread of this book. The Final Empire is the first book in the Mistborn trilogy, and I read the first and second book last year, and I never actually made it to the third one for some reason, and I really want to finish them, but it's pretty much high fantasy, so there's a lot that goes on, and it's a big book. It's a big book with tiny font, so you know there's a lot that goes on. It's plot heavy. I really wanted to be able to appreciate the third book for all its glory and feel the continuous story, so I decided to reread this. It was actually a buddy read with a lovely lady called Vicky on Instagram. Shout out to Vicky. And we actually read this together, which was really fun. We were meant to read the second book in February, and that was when I was getting towards the end of my pregnancy, but then the baby came early anyway, so that all got sidetracked and haven't managed to pick it up again yet. However, I'm hoping that we will be able to pick up the second book and carry on reading. If you haven't read a Brandon Sanderson book and you are a fan of fantasy, then it is an absolute must. These are the only ones that I've read so far, the first 2 books of the Mistborn trilogy, and his writing is just outstanding. This book and the next book in the series, and I can't even imagine what happens in the third one, but you're basically reading a car crash. A car crashes into a train, and then somehow there's a plane that hits the train as well, and it's all popping off. Everything is going on. You're invested in the characters, you're invested in the plot, you want to know what's happening, you're rooting for different people, you want certain outcomes to happen, you don't get them. There's plot twists, magical fantasy. It is just outstanding. The world building is amazing. I cannot recommend it enough for anybody that hasn't read any Brandon Sanderson yet. I rated this 5 stars. I feel like I've had a really good reading year, so a lot of the books, I might say that a lot of them are 5 stars, but it's just been a good year. What can I say? You really fall in love with the main characters in this book, and it kind of gives me found family vibes between everybody, and you're really invested in the plot. It's like a rebellious plot of like the people against the power. It is so good. I cannot recommend it enough. It's really hard because I really want to give limited information about this book in case anybody does want to read it. It's one of those books where if something happens to a character, you really feel it in your gut. It hurts. It's emotional. You are so invested. I cannot recommend that enough. The second book I read was highly anticipated, and it is Daisy Jones and the Six. I don't know why, but I'd put this off for ages because The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo was the first Taylor Jenkins Reid book that I read, and it is one of my all-time favourite books. So in my head it was like, if I read this book and it doesn't live up to my expectations because of her other book, I'm gonna be really sad. So I just put off reading it for ages. Then I basically had no choice because Daisy Jones and the Six came out on Amazon. I read this and I'm not gonna lie, it took me a little while to get into the format of the book because it's basically written as not an interview transcript, but I guess it is an interview transcript, so it wasn't your typical structure of a book. I wasn't entirely sure if I was going to get into the plot line and feel invested in the characters in that format, but Taylor Jenkins Reid is just... she is that woman. Her writing is just outstanding. You just feel so many emotions. If you haven't read this book yet, even if you've watched the programme, I would have to say read it. It might not be everyone's cup of tea in the format, but if you can look past it, once you do get invested, you really get invested. If I'm being honest, I'd say I was probably 40% in, maybe even 50% until I fully got invested. I really had to stick with it, but then it absolutely paid off for me and I just adored the story. I do love Daisy, I do love her vibe and, you know, the power, but Camilla, she was my favourite character in this whole story. It's one of those books when you get to the end, it just, your heartstrings all over the place. You're a mess emotionally. I don't normally get that emotional reading books, like could potentially shed a tear, and I'm almost certain the only two books that have ever made me do that are The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo and When I Got to the End of Daisy Jones and the Six. So this was another fat 5 stars from me. Book number 3, just an absolute winner. Richard Osman, The Thursday Murder Club. This is the 3rd book in the series, and I managed to get a Waterstones exclusive one, so look at these edges. We love. I believe the 4th one is out in September this year and I can't wait. This one's called The Bullet That Missed. I cannot recommend the Thursday Murder Club books enough, especially if you're British. It's just got Britishness nailed down. The whole plot basically of each book, it's based on some people in a retirement home that have a little club on a Thursday where they like to, you know, solve mysteries, murders, blah blah blah. And then thinking about the first book, which is obviously where everything is set up, like the characters and their vibe. I can't remember if they were mock cases. One of the old people's children maybe got them case files, or they'd go to the police and get them and then try and solve like unsolved crimes, or if something was going on. It is just phenomenal. It's witty, it's dry, it's funny, but warms your heart at the same time. Richard Osman writes the story so well that you're not only invested in the mystery of the book and the actual plot line, but you're invested in every single member of the Thursday Murder Club, and you get to understand their characters more the more you read about them, what their vibes are, you know, just getting to know more about them and like peeling like the layers away from everybody. For me, these are books that if I had the time I'd read it in a day. I don't have that kind of time anymore, but I was reading big chunks of this every night. It just does not disappoint. I have pre-ordered the 4th book, cannot wait for it to arrive. British mystery but with witty comedy in between, so it's not like dead serious like thriller mystery vibes. It's heavy mystery, but it's still light-hearted. I don't know how he does it. It's absolute magic. This was another big fat 5 stars from me. Then I also reread, this was another reread. I was just feeling comfort reads this year, even though I do need to tackle my TBR. Sometimes randomly I will just think about the Infernal Devices series. Sometimes I just want my heart ripped out. Sometimes I just think about books I've read and think I want to feel that trauma again. And that is basically what I did with this series. These books are just... For me, it was one of those series where you definitely can't feel the full effects of the story until you've read all 3 books, because the plot development, the character development, and then your investment in the characters and their relationship, and then the end, you just can't appreciate it all until you get to the end. So if you've ever tried to read it and maybe you weren't 100% sure about it, I would say definitely stick with it. Another fantasy fiction series. This is like fantasy adventure with romance. I think they're YA books. The first Cassandra Clare books that I've actually read. One of the reasons I did reread them was not only to feel the pain again, but I did also want to start reading The Mortal Instruments for the first time, because they've been sat on my TBR for so long, and I just thought if I reread the Infernal Devices, that will help me just remember a couple of things and then have it as a segue into that. I can't remember if I'm supposed to read the Mortal Instrument books next or the Last Hours books. I'm not 100% sure on what the best reading order is. So if anyone has any recommendations, let me know. When I'm reading a series, sometimes I find it hard to objectively rate each book, because sometimes I'll finish a book and I'll think maybe 4 stars, but then I read the next book and I'm like, oh, I see what you did there. Now I kind of want to make the last one 5 stars because this one's a 5 stars as well. It's hard to say. Overall, I'd say maybe 4.5, just so I'm not dishing out 5 stars like no, there's no tomorrow. If you are into YA fantasy with some romance, then absolutely cannot recommend those books enough. Another element that I hadn't thought about is it is very much found family vibes again. Found family is my absolute weakness. Jem, Tessa and Will, the main characters in the Infernal Devices, you become so invested in them. So many people have talked about these books. There's so much information on the internet. I won't say too much other than the fact that I absolutely loved them. Everything else I read was on my Kindle for the rest of the year. We have 3 books that I read on the Kindle. The next book I read was called Malice by Heather Walter. I think this is one of those books that must have been on the 99p Kindle deal. And I thought, 99p, what the heck? I bought it, no idea what it was about. I just saw the cover and it looked kind of like Disney-ish vibes of like the evil queen from Snow White. This was all that is awful, I'm so sorry. That was all I'd seen basically of the cover and it made me purchase it. On a whim, I just started reading it. No idea what the story was about, just knew that it was a fantasy book, and I also thought it was a standalone. It's part of a duology. I really enjoyed this book when I started reading it. It kind of gives off Sleeping Beauty vibes, but Sleeping Beauty isn't the main character. The main character is the villain. I'm saying villain in quotation marks because I'm pretty sure she is the villain, but you love her. You just absolutely love her. You can't help but feel for her. You can't help but sympathise for her. She's just treated so poorly that, you know, when she does bad shit, you're like, yeah, obviously that's fine. And I did really enjoy it. I kind of whizzed through it, so that's usually how I gauge how much I enjoy a book. I really enjoyed the world building and the concept of the book, where they have different realms, I'll say, that are separated, and there's just like the regular humans, and then there's these people called the Graces, which have basically magical blood. So humans pay them to make these things called elixirs, and depending on what type of grace you have, so there's like beauty graces, like wisdom graces. Alice is like, basically she had bad blood. She was treated as a grace, but technically a villa. It's, without going into the entire plot, it's kind of complicated. Basically, the humans control the graces. They get paid to make these elixirs for the humans. It's all anonymous. Alice would make an elixir someone would ask for that would give someone in court, you know, warts or make them fat, things like that. Then there's the beauty graces that obviously people would ask for things to make them beautiful, all that kind of stuff. And all the graces treated Alice poorly, just so terribly. Their kingdom was ruled by humans, and then there's like a fairy realm across the way, and there was like beef in the past between the fairies and humans. There's a crown, the Briar Crown, there's royalty involved, and basically things go to shit with the royals. There's a curse on the Briar Crown, which basically means any of the heirs, which are all the ladies, if they haven't found true love to break their curse by the age of 21, then they all just die. Without saying too much of the plot, from that point onwards, it does get very interesting. You get really invested in the characters. There are a lot of annoying characters, which I think means that the book is well written, because they're meant to be annoying. You're meant to not like them. I really enjoyed that. I rated that one 4 stars. I haven't just been dishing out 5s everywhere. The book I read after that was Miss Rule. Miss Rule's the second book in the duology. I didn't enjoy this one as much, I'm not gonna lie. I got to points in the book where I did just carry on reading, because I knew it was only a duology and I did really want to know how the story ended. Things got quite repetitive in the storyline, a lot of back and forth that I was getting really tired of, and I don't want to say anything about that because it would spoil the plot of the first book. The world building again was great, loved that. The character development was good. I wish that there was more focus on other characters rather than just Alice and her love interest in the book, basically, because again there was just so much back and forth. It was a bit like, just, you know, get it together, just break up or stay together, whatever. It didn't feel very angsty to me. It was just really irritating. I did enjoy it, but it wasn't my favourite. I rated that one 3 stars just because I enjoyed it less than the first book, and I wouldn't rush to ever reread that, to be honest. Then book number 10, which is the last book that I finished reading after so much fantasy in one with the Infernal Devices trilogy and then that duology of Malice and Miss Rule. I really needed a palate cleanse from fantasy, so I went back to my thriller roots, and of course to my favourite thriller author, which is Lisa Jewell. I had a look on the Kindle store at which books that she had that I hadn't read yet. The one that I chose was called The House We Grew Up In. It was so good. I just love a good thriller. If you haven't read a Lisa Jewell book and you're into thrillers, I highly recommend her. Her writing is fantastic. The plot line, it's never what it seems. It's so multi-dimensional. She's able to write a story and you're so focused on what you think the single path is, that in the background, you know, she's dropping little things here and there to build up to the bigger plot that you obviously can't see. I absolutely love her book so much. This one was no different. I rated it 4 stars only because I've read quite a few of her other books and there are some proper 5-star bangers, and I just didn't want to be dishing out 5 stars willy-nilly again. It was about a family that grew up in a house, I think it was in the Cotswolds, and basically the mother, she's not so bad when the kids are little, but she's basically a hoarder, and it gets worse and worse as the kids grow up and grow older. Once the kids leave, it all goes to shit. The story is written in the present and the past. So in the present day, the mum has passed away and the kids kind of need to go and sort the house out, sort the funeral out, you know, all that stuff. And then the past is the kids growing up in the house, and there's 4 kids in total, and the story is kind of from all their different perspectives. You get bits of all of their lives as well as the mum and the dad, and it just goes into family relationships, unconventional family relationships in such a good way. She's just really good at developing not only the emotional story of all characters, but also winding it into the plot and making it all relevant. So if you've read like thrillers before, sometimes I feel like authors will write something about characters in a mystery and give you bits of information, but it's almost like it's there to fill the page or pad the story out, and usually it doesn't actually tie into anything to do with whatever the greater mystery is. Whereas with Lisa Jewell and her writing, whenever she delves into relationships of whoever's in the book, in this case a family, everything she writes is with purpose and it all adds up eventually to the greater plot line and the end of the book. I just cannot recommend her books enough. So those are all 10 books that I read this year. Hope you enjoyed this video if you watched it. If you feel compelled to read anything based off this video, please let me know. And if anybody has any recommendations for me based off of the books that I've talked about, please send them my way. Thank you for watching, and I'll hopefully see you soon.